So I am speaking to you today as an academic, which I think is a really nice way of saying a nerd, as a serious ballerina, which is another way of saying I'm a nerd, as an older sister and an oldest child, as an avid and fast reader, again a nerd, a lover of all things Harry Potter and Marvel and fantasy, aka nerd, someone interested in literature and history and forensic science. Really, I'm trying to say I'm just a giant nerd. But more than anything today, I speak to you as a rebel. No one laughed. I'm so surprised. When I practiced this with my sister, we had to stop at this point because she was giggling hysterically. I'm going to have to tell her she's just mean now. In all seriousness, though, I am not the kind of person that comes to mind when thinking of a rebel. Rebels are people who wear leather jackets and ride motorcycles, wearing skin-tight black pants that are contrary to all forms of movement, who maybe smoke cigarettes and they have a devil-may-care attitude to everything. They're the Jim Starks, Tyler Durdens, and Ferris Buellers of the world. Everybody wants to be a rebel now. Something about not following the rules and feeling like there are no consequences for your actions sounds very appealing. But the actual definition of a rebel is to show or feel repugnance for or resistance to something. It's not just being in opposition to everything. It's fighting against a very specific societal norm or tradition, to go against the grain. I'm going to try and convince you how I'm a rebel and hopefully show you how you can be one too. I mentioned that I am a ballerina, but I couldn't have said this 5 years ago. It was my little sister who started first, and I just followed her. She would be in class, being a little prima ballerina, and I would wait for her outside, and people would come up to me and say, "Don't you want to try? Your sister's so good." I would have none of it. Then, in 4th grade, I grew 7 inches almost overnight, and I became the picture of gangly awkwardness. That's when people stopped telling me I should dance. They took one look at my klutzy train wreck and were like, "No way." And that's exactly when and why I started dancing. Everybody was saying, "It's too late, do not even bother trying." I have to admit, I looked so awful that first year. It was a really terrible idea to start at 12. In the world of ballet, that's already over the hill. And this was reinforced every time my mother had to look into the baby class, where both my sister and I were, and watch the way too tall, way too big, way too clueless me trying to follow along. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. This was the first hint of my rebellious streak, and probably also my stupidest. Over time, I did get better, though I don't know if it was simply from hard work or because there was nowhere to go but up. People started to approach my parents and say that I really had a shot at a career. It was a relief to hear from others that I was actually good at something that I had fallen in love with doing. But I also heard another idea, that I should drop out of school. The average age of retirement for dancers is 29 years old. If you make it beyond that, most ballet companies have an age roof of 45. To extend the longevity of a career, most dancers will try and get hired when they are 16, 17, or 18 years old. To accommodate that timeline, many dancers homeschool so as to take a reduced number of classes per day, about 3 or 4 hours, to double up on dance classes. I admire so much the dedication that these dancers have to their careers and how willing they are to make sacrifices to have it happen. I have nothing but the utmost respect for their path, but it's not something I could do myself. I admitted to you earlier that I am a nerd. I truly love school. My education isn't something that I or my parents are willing to compromise on. The decision doesn't seem like much, but it turned me into one of the most unlikely of rebels. I heard everything from, "It's a shame you go to school, you're wasting your talent," to how arrogant, how selfish, how presumptuous of you, to assume that you can do something in a way that simply just isn't done that way. Who would have known that going to school would be such a revolutionary act? I am no Malala, but in a world where one makes sacrifices for everything in the hopes of a career, my choice seems subversive, at best threatening, at worst insulting. The simple act of refusing to give up either dance or school is me being a rebel with a cause. And if I had a dime for every time somebody told me it would be impossible to do both, I'd be able to pay for all of my point shoes myself. The naysayers aren't wrong about how difficult this balancing act is. Doing both meant burning a candle at both ends. It meant adding more than 30 hours of practice to an already busy school week. It meant that something else had to give. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. When you are a rebel, people are less likely to be sympathetic with you. You want a part in the show? You're going to have to be twice as good as your competition because they don't want to give it to the girl who has school. You want to be paid attention to in ballet class? You have to make sure the teacher can't take their eyes off you because they don't want to acknowledge you. I concede that it's hard, but it's not impossible. The gatekeepers in either world may not want to be accommodating to this balancing act, but when there's a will, there's a way. Here's where being a rebel becomes important. We can exert our influence to make the changes that we want or need. I don't think there's a person in this room who hasn't faced adversity or who hasn't been told they couldn't do something. The moment you do, the moment you hear those words, that's the moment you too can become a rebel. There are a lot of things in this world that can be changed for the better. Seize these as opportunities. Like Kevin Bacon in Footloose, put on your dancing shoes and be an agent of change. When the status quo isn't budging and no one else is willing to try, show up and be different. Be a rebel with a cause. Here's the thing though. Your greatest opposition will never be an external force. It will always be that little doubting voice we all have in our own heads. The one that's afraid of the uncertainty in the future. The one that's always questioning your abilities and capabilities. Am I good enough? Am I strong enough? Am I fast enough? Am I smart enough? Am I enough? It's part of being human, doubting yourself. No one walks through life so confident in what they are doing that they have no fear. So here's the zeitgeist moment of my speech. The best way to be a rebel is to be a rebel against your own inner negative voice. There is no greater enemy, nothing that will ever stand in your way more than yourself. Nothing is more common and more destructive than that little voice that you hear. Be the biggest, baddest, most rebellious individual you can be against your own perceived limitations. Don't rail against society. Fight against yourself. Be a rebel to dispel your doubts and your fears and your insecurities. Have a devil-may-care attitude to uncertainty and let actions fly into the face of doubt. Be a rebel to yourself, for yourself, and watch the result. In September, I will become a University of Chicago student. I have received several job offers from different dance companies, so I will continue to balance dance and school. My journey isn't over. I still have a long way to go. But I take a small sense of satisfaction in that not only was I able to pull down my own doubt, I managed to disprove some naysayers too. I plan on being a rebel for life, though I think in that event I'll dress the part. Ta-da! Yes, my jacket looks like Captain America's uniform. Don't say I didn't warn you I am a nerd, but I'm also a rebel. Thank you.